Welcome back to another episode of the Changing Hearts and Minds series. This is one of our specialty series where I have my colleague and friend Yangbo do. Hi, Yangbo, how are you?
Doing very well, Elza, thank you.
I am always excited about the topics we talk about, but this one is really interesting because we're focused on preservation-focused tourism, which is a topic I've discussed with you, gosh, long before we even partnered. But it's really around the concept of how do we emphasize culture, heritage, environment, and history as areas of preservation while leveraging it as a point of tourism and to drive sustainable growth and economic development, um, and while still making that area protected and preserving the identity of that particular destination. Um, I always like to kind of start with let's talk a little bit about this in context of a strategy lab. Like how would we would operate something like this and part of our existing programs. So let's start with, the identification of what a strategy lab can do for it. And I'll hand it over to you on the INNOVO side for you to kind of give an overview of what is that first step that occurs when we are taking on a preservation focused program, whether it be for, you know, places like New Orleans that already have an existing and robust tourism uh budget, to others like Sacramento that have a bit less and have a potential for future growth. Um, let's keep it kind of broad on those elements, but knowing that the output would be obviously increased fiscal capacity.
Yes, indeed, to just set the stage here, where INNOVO, through its profitable net zero propositions around decarbonization and circular economy, the key focus is being able to take a much more comprehensive approach around this question of sustainability. And to give a call out to colleague Leslie Tom at the Wright Museum in Detroit. They're one of the first museums that have actually taken that approach. So traditionally, sustainability has been very much about your reducing costs, what your how much carbon footprint or environmental footprint in general your physical plant is producing. And of course, INNOVO helps with that profitably through scaling profitable clean technologies. Yet, just as important, if not more important, is how does that interface with the broader community in which you are situated? How would you use that as a means of encouraging greater community engagement? And another one of our dear colleagues and friends, David Dodd in New Orleans, he'd like to say, think about circular economy tourism, that how can that circularity, how can that be a driver of future-proofing tourism and other activities that involve attracting visitors and even ultimately long-term residents to your region.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of summarizing it. And on the BMG end, we usually go through what are the existing elements that are so existentially important to the identity that those are the identification points that we need to make sure we preserve and we really hone in on so that we can create an ecosystem that focuses on protecting that unique differentiator across it. And then we work through really an analysis around which areas do we want to highlight, which areas do we want to uplift into something a little bit more resilient, knowing that if these types of programs work, there is going to be a pretty big pressure to be able to sustain them. So that's why it's so important to do kind of an identity search of what is so true and authentic to that community that we can focus on preserving, and then where are areas that we need to build resiliency as it's hit with, who knows how many millions of tourists on a period of time. So that's one of the components that we go into. And then as we move further into a strategy lab session, INNOVO and BMG often work together on, like, here's the elements that you and I can kind of work through to say what should we be sharing across the aisle, not only for the due diligence phase when project financing is needed, but also just to make sure that the local population, the tourist population, and the businesses that may be moving in or existing there are all connected and all have the same, are going in the same direction, so that cohesive alignment is really, really critical to the process. And that's why we do the lab initially first before beginning full-blown implementations um, for it. Let's talk a little bit more about the outputs of what not often seen. We know that obviously in the name, it's obviously driving new tourism, but it's more than just that, because not only is it driving new tourism, but increasing the locally, or I guess the overall spend on a per traveler method. It's also then coming into several economic recirculation measures, local businesses, local supply, and then local services or talent that need to be brought in. And part of this is making sure that the talent we're bringing in is quality job creation, and balancing out the highly skilled, mid-skilled, and low-skilled work. And I know we talked about this in a previous session around making sure that we're not going after uh, and only creating jobs for the very low skilled. We want to have enough diversity because that's what creates resiliency in these type of tourism related employment models. Tell me, maybe we can talk a bit more about the skilling, the local services, and how that supplements or complements the new technologies that will be starting to be put in place once a system is going in. Because in our strategy lab, we create the whole implementation plan of how that would organize, and this is part of that, is here's how we would be implemented, and here's the phases that you're going to go through.
Most definitely. Then for local skill upskilling or developing the skills base further through tourism and other activities, the key really here, and it goes hand in hand with playing on the region's strengths, since ultimately, if you want tourism to be a major economic driver, then you would have to develop it in a way in which what is spent locally, what is spent by tourists, actually recirculates within your local economy. So it's a question of, are your locals, so especially in communities that may have been traditionally underinvested, are they also seeing the proceeds from this? Is that spending actually going to the places where it's going to be most effective, not only in terms of raising local incomes, but as those incomes go up, then these same locals would then spend that even further on additional local goods and services. So it's developing and cultivating that type of a virtuous cycle that the more income you're able to derive from tourism, it actually ends up lifting the local economy broadly.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good way of putting it, in the sense that we're trying to have another revenue stream in the overall economy, and thus bringing in other supplemental services that also become different revenue streams as a byproduct, but then also one that is self-running and not just completely um, dependent upon the tourism wheel running, so to speak. Um, Part of this is also going to be what are not only the outputs, which is a better perception of that region or destination, driving new opportunities, both business and just experiential opportunities that if that given that particular culture, heritage, history, environment can offer that is different from other areas. Obviously, our reduced carbon emission or our density because of the technologies that come in, and then the new tourists and the overall spend. Now on the impact and outcome side, we're going to see quite a few other things come into play, not just the job skilling, but the increase in valuations of property and businesses because there's more activity and a higher valuation of just those properties due to everything else, all the new development in the surrounding area around it, and also new businesses wanting to migrate into that given the new model that they kind of want to share the pie, so to speak, of there's new skilled labor, there's more resources that a particular business come in, and that could be both a startup as well as a migration from an existing place. And then let's talk a little bit more about the overall fiscal capacity as the final benefit, because often these are such public-driven initiatives, but they are led both or public-led initiatives, but they are driven by private and public sector support. Um, and that is all to increase fiscal capacity. Let's talk a little bit more about the outcome of that and what does that mean for an organization or if I'm in the tourism department and I'm managing this budget, what does that mean for myself and as well as all my other department counterparts?
Yes, we need to consider where are the assets. So you would need a mapping of where are the assets in the community, and more importantly, which ones are publicly owned, so by a public sector. It could be any layer of government, and being able to do that because as the public sector, if you as the public sector have control over these assets, you're very well positioned to leverage them in a way that can actually further the goals of driving a sustainable tourism. For example, if there are underutilized spaces, let's say near your government buildings or public amenities, there are underutilized spaces like surface parking lots or otherwise underutilized space that you own. Could that not be repurposed into new business, new residential or hoteling, any of these types of operations that would actually help improve dramatically, in such cases, the perception of those assets? How do locals and tourists alike perceive them? But also, these can serve, since they're public, these can serve as fitting anchors as well of a much more broad-based revitalization effort that partly could be aimed at bolstering tourism and all of the potential benefits that would entail in terms of increasing own source revenue, increasing your tax receipts from commercial activities, increasing the value of land, other assets that you own, especially as a public sector. So you're able to recycle that wealth into creating additional and more robust public amenities that would then be yet reinforce that virtuous cycle as far as sustainable preservation-oriented tourism goes.
Yeah, exactly, which leads right into the next topic we have, which is around how do we create connected communities and communities that have new perceptions being shaped, um, both locally as well as across that region or collaring that destination for that up to even potentially a world renowned level, depending on what their goals are. Um, so yeah, we'll make that as our next topic point for perception and overall community well-being when it comes to strengthening connectivity. So thank you, Yangbo. This has been great. Until next
You
time.
are very welcome.